Yeah, absolutely. All right, so so moving on, we'll read verses 10 through 16. We're still in 1 Samuel chapter 18 here. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall." But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David but had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaigns. In everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he had led them in their campaigns. So my first question here is, they're in the palace, and Saul's lounging and David is playing the lyre. Why does Saul have a spear in his hand?
Yeah, that's a really good question. He just happens to have a spear there in his hand. Yeah. And something that's interesting here too, he was prophesying in his house.
Yeah.
While David was playing the lyre, as he usually did. So I didn't do any sentence structure on this. Is the he usually did in reference to David playing the lyre, or in reference to Saul prophesying in his own home?
Yeah.
And also, when did Saul become a prophet?
Right.
Right. So it's kind of interesting what's going on here. I would love to read a little bit more into that about what it is that Saul is doing there. But you're exactly right. He's just like, I see him like laying on a couch, and he's like he's got a spear, and he's like tossing it from hand to hand or something,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, we talked about how quickly Saul's jealousy arises and how he becomes fearful of David. And, Saul goes from giving David this pretty high-ranking office and playing the lyre for him to trying to kill him. Yeah. Like immediately. Like you throw a spear, you say, "I'll pin him to the wall." That's pretty clear that there's a lot of hatred there.
Yes, there is. Yeah.
And so here's my question. It says he missed him and David eluded him. Was Saul bad? Did Saul miss? Did David duck? Because it says David eluded him. But here's what's crazy. He eludes him twice.
Yeah, 2 times. Yeah.
So a guy throws a spear at you, says he's going to pin you to the wall, and you hang around, and he does it again.
Yeah. What's the saying? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Right.
Right. And so it's interesting that David, call him naive, just call him a guy that does his job, but he's like, hey, this is my job, and I'm going to do it, whether the guy tries to kill me or not.
Yeah. Well, I think that's interesting. I think this is an early sign of David's character without necessarily calling it out. Because as we're going to see, David is not quick to be against the king.
Right.
Because God appointed this king.
Right.
He is God's anointed. Even if the spirit has departed him, David sees Saul as God's anointed, and he takes his covenant oath very seriously.
Yeah.
He's like, I serve the king. Now, he doesn't want the king to kill him, obviously. Otherwise, he would have allowed it.
Yeah.
But I think this really speaks to kind of Saul's, to David's honor of the king. And maybe he hopes that Saul will come out of it. Maybe he hopes that Saul will recover in some way. And something else that he says here is that Saul was, right after that, he says Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David and had departed Saul. And I think that's interesting because it makes me wonder if that is an after the fact understanding of why Saul was afraid, or if they understood in the moment that Saul's like, Saul knows that he's not going to be the king.
Right.
Saul knows he's going to lose the kingdom.
Yeah.
And he may just be jealous of David because he sees David as like everything that's happening, it's all pointing to David at that point. So does Saul know he's lost this? Maybe he does because he's also tormented.
Yeah.
But does he know like that David's truly the anointed, or is he just responding in this? And as they're writing this later, are they saying, oh yeah, this is clearly why he's, because he doesn't have the Spirit of the Lord anymore.
Yeah.
And the reason David is so calm is because David does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and so, Saul begins, he begins his anger with David begins to grow. And so he sent David away from him and gave it command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaigns. Basically, he sends him off to war.
Yeah.
Now, it's not written in here, but you kind of get the idea. You try to kill somebody, and then you put him in command of 1,000 men and send him off to war. You have a purpose for that.
Yeah. Well, maybe David takes a play from this playbook later on in his life.
And there's a little bit of foreshadowing here that obviously we'll get to, in a few weeks.
Oh,
But yeah.
maybe because, Saul's not, though, as clever as David was.
No.
With trying to dispatch those that he didn't want. So,
Yeah.
so David goes out with his 1,000 men, but he just goes out and he's successful in everything he does.
Totally backfires on Saul. Yeah. Saul doesn't realize just how much God is with David, because it's a common theme. Literally everything David does, he does well, and he succeeds with fair amount of ease. He says in everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. Then we see that Saul becomes afraid of David because he's like, well, shoot, I tried to kill him, that didn't work. Now totally backed on fire. Now he's already probably more popular than I am.
Yeah.
now I send him out to try to kill him, and he's only prevailed, so he's only going to become more popular. And Saul can start to see that this is kind of spiraling out of control for him.
Yeah, well, he's killed his tens of thousands. You're going to let him get another tens of thousands.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. One little nerdy note here. In verse 16, he says, "But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns." This is another thing I'd like to dive into sometime when I have the time. I noticed this as I was doing this study, how often they talk about Israel and Judah.
Yeah.
And with King David, we really do see the first kind of, not splitting, but kind of tribalism that we end up seeing when they end up in civil war later on, right? Where you have the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. And so we kind of think it's almost as if these borders and these, lines are already drawn just out of family, family interests. So at any rate, I find that fascinating. And I wonder how much of that, again, is being written back into the text, or if it is how things were.
Yeah, absolutely.